And it's now my immense pleasure to introduce Holly Herndon and Mat Dryhurst, artists well known for their pioneering legendary work in machine learning, in software and in music. They developed their own technology and also protocols. You will see protocols are going to play a big role in the presentation. Of course, also protocols for living with the technology of others, often with a focus on the ownership and also the augmentation of digital identity and voice. So these technical systems they use are not only facilitating expansive artworks across media, but are actually proposed as artworks unto themselves. Now, Holly and I met actually at a moment when we made a research on a very unlikely topic with Ben Vickers about crypto raves, how crypto technology and rave culture could come together. About 8 years ago, we've had conversations ever since, and it led to an exhibition which is on right now. You still have time to come and see it until the 2nd of February in London at the Serpentine North, called The Call. And this exhibition has to do with AI, and Holly and Mat, as artists, feel that art can play a role in guiding the future of AI by simply getting involved. And that, of course, involves also addressing concerns about data provenance, about model ownership, IP, creative displacement, and also human agency. For this exhibition, The Call and the accompanying book, All Media is Training Data, Holly and Mat created data, show us the training of the model, and also its output. And all of this is part of the artwork. And when we talked about form and impact, preparing for today, Holly and Mat said that basically protocol art might be a new form and also a new format, maybe even, as we will hear today, a new art movement. And then in terms of impact, it is fascinating to see the exhibition in London, which is curated by Eva Jäger, is in the meanwhile quoted both by the EU and also by the UK government, not even taking into account that it's an exhibition. They're just basically using the research of Holly and Mat. So there is a direct way there of impacting dialogues of society and politics. You will hear now in a speech from Holly and Mat, and we will then have opportunity to ask everything you always wanted to know about AI. A very warm welcome to Holly Herndon and Mat Dryhurst.
That's the clicker. Great, okay. Hello, everyone. Just make sure I've got the clicker. There we go. Yeah. Thank you so much, Ulrich. Thank you for everyone putting on this event and everyone who's spoken earlier. It's been really wonderful, obviously very, very different context, but it's a great pleasure to be here. I actually, before we start the presentation, I prepared a short statement. You know, as Hans-Ulrich pointed out, we titled this protocol art, which is a term we've been using for our work for quite some time. Hopefully it ends up making a little bit more sense by the end of the presentation, but the basic definition that we're using for this purpose is the creative engineering of technical and ethical protocols upstream of the production of media, communication, and aesthetics, right? So the idea is engineering the rules of a game before anybody plays it. With the hope being that by creating new rules, new kinds of art and exchange emerge from their exploration. And so before we start, I feel it's always really nice to respond to a curatorial statement. Philip earlier, I thought, framed really nicely this idea of form and impact. And two things stayed with me, right? One is this idea of kind of autonomy or agency, which is a bit of a North Star for everything we do. Trying to achieve some mastery and agency over the technical and economic protocols that we all have to live with, hopefully enough to propose new ones that capture the imagination. And the second is a brief comment on the seemingly diminishing role of art in the minds of politicians and the wider public, which I hear. And to maybe playfully complicate that reading in advance of what we're showing, we've actually had the opposite experience in our corner, which is maybe worth elaborating, right? So over the past decade, there's been a passionate, at times perhaps too passionate, debate over decentralized protocols, NFTs, that word, AI agents, meme coins, AI models, right? And in my time, it's been the most I've ever seen the wider public wrestle with many of the fundamental questions of art, often outside of an art context, right? In 20 years, I've rarely seen a more vibrant debate about creativity, art, authorship, intent, human values, and economic value systems than in those specific domains, which are traditionally considered the realm of technology, right? And so an hour's drive from here in Davos, I don't know if it's still happening, every political leader in the world right now is in some cases existentially preoccupied with the technical protocols of the present, right? Wondering where they and their public stand regarding the next internet of generative AI and decentralized finance. In our lifetimes, I'm sure everyone here, we're millennials, everyone here has seen the deformation of the creative industries to satisfy the demands of the attention economy, which is in itself a protocol and ideology as to what is deemed valuable and what is deemed newsworthy, right? And I would hope by now that we all understand that the latest developments of AI models and the industries and economic systems that they facilitate and that facilitate them will in no doubt impact the world immeasurably. Yet too often we leave those proposals to a handful of companies in Palo Alto. And so our practice is in large part a product of that observation and an attempt to be prescriptive rather than simply reactive to whatever an engineer at Meta thinks. So that's my short prepared statement from earlier with the curatorial framing, and now we'll talk about our work a little bit.
Thank you. So we're going to talk about this idea of protocol art and illustrate that with some of our projects. So Matt and I have a background in releasing music, and we started kind of like working our way through the technical stack with an album titled Platform. We were thinking about how the engineering decisions on the various platforms that we were using in daily life were impacting the creative decisions that we were making. That's why we called the album Platform. And then we followed that up with an album in 2019 that we started in 2017, where we started playing around with machine learning tools, and we titled that one Proto, short for protocol, because we were kind of working our way through the stack and thinking, okay, the platforms are working on top of a protocol, and that's actually setting even design decisions for them. So with Proto, we decided to train an AI that we named Spawn and invite that AI to be a member of a human ensemble that then we could kind of train our AI with, asking consent, giving compensation. And this was all really pre-productized generative AI. So a lot of the AI that people interact with today, those are kind of pre-trained models, largely by scraping the internet, largely without asking permission. This was at a time when none of that was available. And I'm really grateful that that's when we started working with AI, because we had to build things from the ground up. And we really understood by doing that entire process how important those design decisions were, how important creating the data set was, how that was actually an art in and of itself, an art moment. When we would perform and tour our album, we would sometimes invite the audience to join in the training with us. So we would get thousands of people singing in call and response. And that was a really fun way to, share this kind of nascent technology with people and invite them into the process. So fast forward a little bit to 2019, the COVID pandemic. I was at home a lot, and so all my tours were canceled. But I wanted to continue with the AI research we were doing, and I wanted to create a voice model trained on my own voice that felt like the kind of IP that I owned and could give full consent to training on. So we made a project called Holly Plus. We worked with many different collaborators in the engineering community. And for this example, we created a real-time version of my singing voice where anyone could perform through me and as me. So this felt like a really new kind of moment for IP. So thinking about intellectual property as something that could be opened up, maybe more playful. And so we started calling it identity play. And we realized that it opens up a whole kind of like thorny, hairy set of issues that we've basically been dealing with ever since. But I want to play you this example of my friend Fur singing through my voice so you can really see how it's happening in real time. And he's able to kind of duet with himself and a kind of version of me that we presented at TED. And with this microphone, you'll hear a live version of Holly Plus developed with Voxer Labs. Anyways, he goes on to do a great performance. We don't have time to play all of that now. But the voice has always been a really interesting kind of inflection point for me. I've been working with the voice for decades now because it really is this interesting kind of intersection between the communal and the individual. We learn our voices through, hearing the voices around us, through mimesis, through language, through dialect, but it's also something that we perform with agency as individuals. So it's in this kind of really interesting in-between space that I find really ripe for exploration. So we also created the Holly Plus protocol. So this was a way to kind of decentralize my identity and open up these tools that we were creating, allowing other people to make work through my voice, and then revenue share in the works that were kind of sold after that. And then the profits could go back into creating more tools to share, and on and on and on. And this was pretty early on, so a lot of the tools that are available now weren't available then. So we had to do a lot of the kind of like royalty splitting and all this stuff we had to build ourselves, and was really kind of clunky. But we're really noticing that there's this the output of these models isn't just me, it is also whoever's performing through the model. So we find ourselves in this unique situation where the output is both you and me. And so we're trying to come up with frameworks for how that could work for copyright and for remuneration.
Yeah, which is a great segue. So actually, after that TED presentation of Holly Plus, just to reiterate Holly's point, right? The interesting thing about AI models, even like small models and larger AI models, is that they're owned by everybody and nobody, right? This accounts for ChatGPT, which incorporates like billions of tokens of data from absolutely everyone. In those cases, the output that comes out is both the product of the person prompting the model and the product of the aggregated data of everybody that contributed to that archive of knowledge. After TED, someone came up to us and was like, well, if you wanted to start an organization right now, what would you do? What would you focus on? And we said this, AI data, because it's really fascinating. Largely for that reason, that you need everybody for them to work really well, but we don't have good systems of remuneration or consent to make sure that it works well for everybody, right? And so we started an organization called Spawning. For the purpose of this short presentation, there's a few things that we've done that I think really do apply to this kind of protocol art perspective, form, and absolute impact. One is, going back to 2022, we started something we called the Spawning Consent Protocol, which basically allowed for anybody to see whether their work or identity is present in an AI model and choose to opt out. This is prior to any of the discussions that are quite common in the news today. It's like a journalist's weekly beat to talk about this now, but no one was talking about that back then. And the Spawning Consent Protocol is actually very successful. We've registered 2 billion pieces of media opted out. Many of the AI companies observe it. Hugging Face, which is kind of the GitHub or the place where people get their AI models, has actually integrated it in there. And this is one of the things, as Hans Ulrich pointed out earlier, that's often cited by major governments. It just so happens that the UK government right now is discussing an opt-out, a piece of opt-out legislation where this is kind of the #1 example. And I think it's a decent example of what started as an art project actually demonstrating some impact. This is the nice way of doing things. This one's kind of fun. This is kind of the more tricky way of doing things. So this is a reference to a performance that we did in 2023 that we called Kuduru. Kuduru, for those who may be interested, it's worth looking into. They're the original boundary stones. So these old, beautiful boundary stones. Incidentally, one of the first objects ever curated in an exhibition ever, for the purpose of argument. But Kuduru is basically a network performance that we did where we figured out a mechanism to actually disrupt AI training. And so to explain this graph, it's actually, I'm very proud of this. This is global AI image training, and the 2 troughs that you see that have test 1 and test 2 next to them is us pressing a button and stopping it all, very successfully. And incidentally, this technique actually has since been integrated into Cloudflare, which basically provides most web traffic. And it turns out
that's not clear. Like, stop AI training for everyone in the world. Like every AI company losing millions of dollars a minute. That all stopping, and then all of the kind of like developer discords going like, what's going on? Do you have access? What's happening?
for two half-hour intervals, and obviously we didn't keep it on because then there's actually potential legal repercussions to keeping it on, and people are spending a lot of money on this. But again, there's an exhibition of agency to say, okay, well, actually, the protocol of AI training, as stated by AI companies right now, is that the internet is their playground to do anything. As such, it is also our playground to do anything. And sadly, this is a world we don't want to live in, where it's a cat and mouse game of different people trying to disrupt and shut slipped down things over time. But we felt it was evidently a very successful performance. And I guess this kind of like this approach toward data provenance compensation, all this kind of bureaucratic stuff that we hope to make it a little bit more exciting for people, it maybe led into the show that is currently up at Serpentine. I guess, Holly, I'll pass that on to you.
Yeah, so the call is now up at Serpentine. It closes at the end of next week, so please do stop by if you're in London. So we decided with the call to create a collective choral singing model, and to show the kind of full technical stack of creating a model as an artwork and to invite the visitor into that process. We're operating, if you want to switch the...
Oh yeah, sorry.
We're operating with the assumption that all media is training data, and that doesn't mean that all media is training data. No, we think that medium is much more meaningful than that, but that as soon as something is captured in a piece of media, you know, a photograph, an audio recording, this lecture, a video, it can become part of a training canon that you might not even realize. It might be completely opaque to you. So that we see that as a kind of like paradigm shift, much like the internet changed the way that artists were thinking about documenting their work and distributing their work. We see this as a kind of like fundamental kind of inflection point for that. So we decided to, also the book, just to do a quick plug, the book is outside if you're interested in reading more into that. So we decided to create our own kind of AI training protocol with the idea of making AI, trying to make a beautiful way to make AI. And so we saw every aspect of the training and the creation of a model as an art moment. So I think a lot of people interact with kind of pre-trained models, and you know, you text something in and then you get an image out, and you're only just seeing like one tiny piece of the process. So we really wanted to treat the entire process as art making moments, from the data collection, which means people performing in a room, human beings, you know, using very sophisticated human coordination technology, choirs to sing together in a room. Even the labeling of the data impacts the way that you're able to prompt through the data set. The model making the architecture that you choose, the way that you interface with it, and then also the model interactions. These models are kind of like inherently interactive. They want to be played with. So that was a really important aspect for us, that we could invite the public to come in and perform through the models themselves. So we started at the beginning, and we made a songbook for AI training. And so this was, because it was in London, we built it, we trained an AI model to kind of create infinite hymns. And we built it on the English choral tradition, but we also brought in elements of sacred harp tradition, which is a tradition from where I'm from in East Tennessee, and involved a lot of improvisation, because we really wanted the choirs that we invited in to have a lot of agency in the performance of the material. So the book is kind of like a map. The music, we would always say the music is in you. The book is a kind of map or a guide to help you find it, because we wanted to see how the different choirs would interpret the material. That's more interesting for the model. And we covered the full phonetic range of the English language, so that, you know, the model would understand what each sound sounds like. So maybe we'll play an example of a training song, and this is a very kind of classic English choir called the Bristol Fitzharding Consort. And so this is their interpretation of one of the hymns.
Okay.
Nope, that's not it.
That's a different song.
Yes, there you So we took the book around the UK, and we recorded with 15 different choirs, with various backgrounds and different kind of levels of experience. So it was really interesting to see the different way that the choirs interacted with the songbook. And it was also really important to us that consent was a really big part of the creating of the training set, and also the treatment of the training set afterwards, and of the model. So we created with FAE, which is the Future Art Ecosystem really amazing team at the Serpentine. We worked with a data trustee, Jen Ding. And so all of the different choirs were really able to vote and have a voice in what would happen with their data moving forward and what would happen with the models. In fact, we had to negotiate with the data trust to be able to use the data for the exhibition. That was a really interesting experience, seeing the various levels of understanding of how model training and data works and being able to answer those questions and concerns from the beginning. So maybe we can play an example of output. So we combined our artistic musical archive with the data set to create a kind of song-making model, so it can create fully coherent songs over like a 3-minute period. And we'll play you an excerpt from the exhibition. So that was entirely generated, just to be clear, that is entirely generated from the model.
Yeah, and to this point, going back to this idea earlier of saying, okay, these large models are like everyone and no one, it was really interesting to see some of the training choirs come through to the show and hear traces of themselves in this kind of emergent new output, understanding that there's a little piece of them in there, but they clearly were not the individual source of it. And we see that, in a sense, like a lot of our perspective on AI models more broadly is to try and situate them, at least, in a much longer, deeper history of coordination technologies, or the general desire of wanting to submit to something greater than the sum of its parts, wanting to submit to something much greater than the individual, because these models are ultimately a monumental collective accomplishment, often framed through individualistic terms. And one of the things we're trying to push on at the moment is this idea of a very sacred and a public AI, right? So in the case of the Choral Trust and this experiment with FAE, of course, we're playing in a very, a relatively bloodless area, right? There's choral data, and then people have this democratic process with a delegate to be able to determine what happens with their data. What about national health data, right? What about national data protected by firewalls or whatever the future holds? We actually do have to kind of contemplate what ideally democratic systems of governance would be for that. And so that was kind of a pilot for it. And that maybe, I should have played this video. It's a bit more fun.
That's fine.
Yeah. But that maybe touches on some of the work that we started doing toward the end of last year too. So this is PD12M. It's basically the largest high quality, fully public domain image data set that we released to the public. It's proven to be quite popular, but we did it in service of something that we're calling Public Diffusion. So this is a model that's currently 25% trained. And the idea here is to basically say, what if we could create an AI model that's owned by literally nobody? So, take and refine publicly available data, train a new model that can be used by absolutely everybody with no restriction whatsoever. How does that change the conversation around copyright or data rights and so on and so forth moving forward? We think that it would change the conversation considerably, because it would take away this notion that in order to have a really performant, really good AI model, you need to be taking anything from anyone. Yeah, so that's kind of a project we're working on at the moment, at least in domains that it knows. It performs really well. Look, like the image on the left is Public Diffusion. The image on the right is, a company that's apparently worth $1 billion.
So just to be clear, Flux on the right, and this is just scraping the internet, using everyone's data without asking. On the left, this is all public domain data ingested. So. But
there's things it doesn't know. Yeah. So anyway, so I think that's the end of the presentation component. Yeah, and hopefully it's somewhat convincing that if you do actually start to intervene and maybe think at the protocol level, you can actually create things that do have a meaningful impact and interesting kind of aesthetic outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Holly and Matt. Do we have questions? It's a bit strong, the light. We can't really see anything.
Yeah.
If you can turn down the lights, that would be good.
That would be nice.
There's definitely a question there.
Yeah.
It's extremely aggressive, the light. We cannot see you. So
Yes, I'm here.
if you can turn down these lights a bit, that would be great. Yeah, we have a question.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's literally amazing what you are working on. Would love to hear briefly your vision, if you think horizontally across, because this you can apply it literally on every sector. So, would love to get your vision because this is very inspiring. Thank you.
Should we answer it individually?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
go
Sure.
ahead.
A vision more broadly for the AI work specifically, or yeah, I mean, I think that ultimately the idea is if you start to think upstream of tools that are provided to you, there are different options available to people. There's different options available to different territories that are there to be explored. And so the vision, in a sense, at least on like maybe a more policy level or something along those lines, is saying, okay, I'll give you a great example. There's a lot of people worried right now about their future in creative industries, right? We have these really good tools that produce really good stuff, right? Whether it's art or not is a debate for another time. But the idea there is, I personally feel that a lot of those people are worried a great deal because of sunk costs. You spend a lot of money going to university to train to be an artist or someone like this for a field that is not prepared to deal with this. There's another universe where you say, okay, can we actually fund public services that are free to everybody from the profits made from the collected data of everybody, right? In the same sense that you would think about a national health service. There are all kinds of different policy proposals that can come from this simple idea of looking at a data set, not as an imposition, but rather as an opportunity to say, okay, we are unavoidably collectivized by these technologies, so why don't we start thinking about a more collective means to spread any wealth generated from them? That's one case in point, but yeah.
We can take, yeah, we have many questions here.
So AI is always fed data, and so in some ways it's always sort of a reaction to something that already exists, and it's sort of unquestionable that if you put all this information together, you're actually creating something new in the music that you are sort of producing. But art has also, through generations, created sort of these innovative thresholds where something completely unique has come out. And how do you see, is there any way that AI or the digital realm can actually break that boundary to produce this unique threshold for the future?
Yeah, there's this concept in AI called emergence. So when something truly novel emerges that wasn't present in the data set, this is obviously something that's rare. It's not happening with every kind of text to image generation, but it is, I do think it is possible. I still see the human as a really important actor in this kind of loop in interpreting the output and judging the output and understanding how to guide things and direct things. As we touched on briefly, we see really every moment in the building of a model process is a moment for art making. And these different decisions, these different human decisions have such a huge impact on the output at the end. Yeah, I still see it as kind of like human in the loop scenario, but I do believe in this idea of emergence.
It's also, I think that over time, our confidence that models cannot produce something original will be tested.
You experience, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the emergence thesis, I think, is quite well qualified. I mean, it brings us to ask hard questions of ourselves about how novel things were that we decided were novel, right? And ultimately, the point comes to build off Holly's point. Number one, humans will be using these tools to do novel things, right? So in most circumstances, I would discourage people from just doing whatever a model decided to do or the first thing that a model spit out. But secondly, it will take humans to coordinate and develop consensus over what is interesting, right? And so, yeah, so there will always be some kind of subjective layer in there, irrespective of whether models can produce emergent outputs, which I think they can, to be honest. Yeah.
I'll take a few more questions.
So I follow the thread. So I saw the show in London. So the example is many people were seen there. So do you take all the voices? So what you have done with the data after the show in Serpentine, and what's going to be the new production?
That's a great question. So for the when we invited the public in the exhibition to sing through the voice model, that was not being recorded because that felt like something that they couldn't consent to. That would have been a whole kind of, we would have needed a whole consent system around that. So we were just inviting people to explore the latent space of the model. So you would sing in and you could kind of weave your voice around and find other voices in the model. For the training of the model itself, that was where we created the data trust. And so that's still ongoing, and they're still kind of managing how that data is being used moving forward. We plan on touring this show, and we want to invite the public in to continue training. And I think in the spirit of some of the public diffusion and the public domain work that we're doing, we would like to invite the public in to opt in to a public domain recording that would then be available to the public.
Got a question here in the middle.
Well, thank you first and foremost for your contagious enthusiasm. It's really beautiful to see how you operate within so many different spaces, and you used the word agency. So I was wondering, from a concert, from being closed in your house and having to work, let's say, with a computer, to the exhibition space, to then to policy, which I think when you were presenting Spawning, I thought extremely interesting. Where do you see, let's say, your agency having the most impact? And potentially, what does it mean for you to go into policy, to the fact that the UK is now using sport? Like, I didn't quite understand how that works, but I understand that there is a connection between Spawning and the UK legislation. So maybe if you could expand a little bit on that. And thank you again.
Regarding the UK, it's largely they're currently doing like a copyright consultation because, as far as I understand it, they want to move and change data training rights in the UK, and so the Spawning work and the call work was referenced as kind of the prime example of enabling people to have consent over their data. To your point about impact, it's really hard to tell. Right. I mean, to a certain extent, you work on these projects. You can see that people are noticing them. We also know, for example, that there are many people internal to companies who have been very influenced by the work that we've done, particularly some of the language and examples.
Especially the consent and remuneration. We kind of forced that conversation in a lot of big companies, and we were both really shocked when we would take Zoom calls from researchers where they just weren't thinking about it. And I was like, how are you not thinking about IP? This is like going to be a really important issue for your business.
Yeah. But I think ultimately it comes down to this idea of saying, okay, our first impulse is not like a policy one, right? Like our first impulse is saying, do we have mastery over these tools? Do we have agency over them sufficient to be able to create something novel ourselves, right? For our own practice, we've always built our own instruments, our own tools, and the question of impact there becomes, one of, how to put it? Sometimes we will also run into walls. Right. So in the case of many of the examples we've shown, we didn't run into a wall, or that it's been somewhat generative. In other cases, we definitely pursued things and being kind of had reality slap us in the face that we actually don't have as many degrees of movement as we thought we did. So it really falls down to me about this idea of kind of like executable critique, right? Of saying it's one thing to say that you have an idea, or you have kind of a critique of something. It's another thing to engineer a system that embodies that critique and hopefully finds a way through it. That seems to be the holy grail, and quite whether we've been successful or not, time will tell.
I take one more question.
I was just going to say it's also about operating at multiple speeds, because these different fields move at like vastly different speeds. Like policy is really, really slow, kind of infuriatingly slow. And then, crypto is like lightning speed, like whiplash, and AI is kind of in that realm as well. So it's about kind of trying to keep multiple speeds going at once. And I think that we're kind of at our best when we're helping translate between fields. And so we do a lot of that. I think that that's where we have a lot of impact.
Thank you both. We can take one more question.
There was a lady in red over there I noticed.
Oh.
No, please.
Yeah, if there are short questions, we can take them both.
You don't mind?
Oh, go ahead.
Please.
Okay.
Sorry.
Take both questions.
Okay.
That's good.
Okay, great. 2 questions. AI. No, it's really one. It's really one. AI and more internalized sensorial perceptions, touch, smell, taste, and similarly AI and other species?
Qualia, right? We're certainly not of the position that AI has its own agency, right? I don't think you can discount it, and I think there's really clever people who hold that position, and we're not those people, right? In a sense, on the topic of AI and other species, quite interesting. I've seen some quite kind of hyperbolic statements about using some of these tools to translate from whales or something like this. By all means, I encourage people to do that. I'm a little skeptical, if I'm honest. But there's no doubt that if our capacity to translate and digest abstract amounts of information is being improved by these systems, we are closer to getting to that outcome, right? Yeah, all power to people working on that. But in our case, we're really thinking about people using these tools, and ideally, these tools helping make life better for people, ideally.
There's no doubt a difference between a media, kind of like a video file of a performance or being at a performance, right? These are two entirely different things. The AI is ingesting the video of the performance. We are these amazingly sophisticated, sensorial, input all over our bodies. So we very much value that, and we see that great distinction.
We can take the very last question now, which was in the back.
Hey, thank you very much. I just wanted to come back to a very basic question. I mean, your work is all about how to give a voice to give a differentiated voice and not just grab all the data there is in order to being less racist and sexist and biased. And this is, if I'm quite right, and then you somehow, if you go into this permission, you get the permission of the data you're collecting, but this still does not prevent us from repeating old patterns. Is there something in your work that goes specifically on that question too?
Absolutely. Just to push back a second, that's actually not been the focus of our work, partly for the reason you stated. There was a period of time in the 2010s where that was a large focus of AI ethics. Regrettably, it was always a little symbolic, because it really is the models that we have currently will reflect whatever data you put into them, right? And so for us, we took more of a materialist stance on this, of saying it's all well and good to think about that question, and ideally models should represent the world in all its glory. But rather, there's this second question, which is about taking all of the data in order to create a new industry that has harvested data from everybody else without answering questions about how people contributing that data might hope to continue making a living. And in a sense, a lot of that debate in the 2010s, I felt, was slightly camouflaging the real data politics, which was a very brutal materialist economic one, right? Everyone was worried about ChatGPT saying something silly, right? And rather the question should be, like, what happens to newspapers? Whatever. They're already struggling a little bit, So our focus hasn't been on that, partly for that reason. That these kind of more material questions are also just more interesting in terms of, we're not like copyright maximalists or anything like this. Like this idea of thinking about what IP is as a new protocol is just fascinating, right? And has all these potential implications going forward. So there's no reason to even be cynical about it. Just be like, okay, cool. This is the new deal. How would we do this in a way that benefits the most people? And yeah.
Thank you all so much for your questions, and thank you, Holly and Matt. I want to say one more thing, which is actually, Holly and Matt really show us that artists can play a role and make a difference in these whole discussions about AI. And it was fascinating in Davos. There were many, as we can imagine, discussions on AI. And one of the most surprising thing came actually from Demis Hassabis of DeepMind, who just got the Nobel Prize, as you all know. And he basically said, we need to think about philosophers in the space of AI. And it's interesting that Wen Chung, with whom I did a conversation in Davos, said, Simondon is relevant. Think about, less about control, but about evolution. Yukui also refers to Simondon. So we need artists in it, but also philosophers. Thank you so much, Holly. Thank you so much, Matt. Big round of applause.
Thank you.